Welcome to Visionary Voices Exchange, the podcast that disrupts how we think about blindness and low vision. So join us as we amplify the voices of individuals, families, and professionals living, learning, and thriving with blindness and low vision. We're your hosts, Janet Lebrecq and Carlos Servan. Hey, Carlos, how are you?
Hey, Janet, I'm glad to be next to you again.
Well, thank you. It's unbelievable, but here we are, Carlos, and we are already in the month of October.
Right, and this month reminds me about used to be the White Cane Law. Now I think it's called the Blind Equality Awareness Month, BEAM, but also the Disability, what is that, Equality Employment Month?
Yeah, they have National Disability Employment Awareness Month and DEEM. Also, all these acronyms and alphabet soup, right?
That's right. I'm glad you're the one saying it. I want to kind of reflect upon this kind of celebration because most people, well, I shouldn't say most people, but many people feel like, why are we celebrating this month? We already have the White Cane Law, we have the ADA, we have civil rights for the blind. The laws are there. Why do we have to keep doing these awareness events? I went to law school, and as a blind person, I attend a lot of meetings. And what I know is the law can maybe modify behavior, but does not create awareness. So therefore, it's the job of us, people with disabilities, the blind community, to create this awareness, to show how capable we are, to tell our story. So I'm glad we're doing this, Janet.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's interesting because, the awareness is what really does lead to helping to change the paradigm. And the paradigm that I'm thinking about is the paradigm of marginalization. So sort of the issue of kind of not understanding what the limitations of blindness are, but also when you think about what the attitudes about blindness are, there's a strong need to keep raising awareness for everyone. And it helps to demystify, I think, a lot of the issues around blindness and people understanding, where do we need help? Where do we not need help? Or what kinds of tools or strategies do we need to use? And how can others, and I mean others in the sense of society, professionals, educators, parents, anybody who is really interfacing and dealing with an individual who is blind or low vision, that awareness really contributes to increasing education and knowledge and comfort.
That's right. I remember when I first came to this country, for those of you who are listening and don't know, when I came to this country, I came in 1989 when I was very young. Well, I was 23 years old. Coming from another country where there were not opportunities for people with disabilities, including the blind, of course. Coming to America and learning about the services, the philosophy about blindness, not everybody had a good philosophy. I started to be aware myself and how important it was, and still is, to educate the public about the capability of the blind, the capability of people with disabilities. And when we say the public, we, the blind, are also part of that public. At least I was when I first started. And I learned about the difference between just being blind and stay home and being a capable, independent blind person being in charge of my life, that was empowering, just the way how people say it.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because we all, as children, we answer questions, our parents answer questions about, what is it that you want to do? Or if you're a parent, what do you do? What field are you in? And we grow up, with the idea that, and the expectations that we're going to work, we're going to be able to contribute, that we have ideas and aspirations about the type of work that we want to be able to do. And it's challenging, obviously, for the blindness community and disability community, in general, to think about employment. We want to be able to work. I've never been the kind of person, for example, that said, well, I'm just going to sit home for the rest of my life and live out my life sitting in my home or in my community.
Right. I don't think anybody likes to do that, but many of us think that's the only option we have because, again, we were not aware of the capability of the blind or what is out there.
That's true. And I think, there's research, lots of research, that clearly demonstrates that not only the ability for individuals who are blind or low vision to work, but that the tools are there today. We are so rich with technology today, but at the same time, that technology has not caught up necessarily to us. So, for example, the barriers, when you think about what are those potential barriers, when I was looking for a job as a teenager, I wanted to be able to go to work just like everyone else. And we didn't have the internet. There was no internet. And we were thinking about as kids, well, I would like to go to work. I want to be a nurse's aide. And that's really what I wanted to be able to do back then. And so you automatically start going to the newspaper. And that's how jobs were advertised, was through the newspaper. Or you heard about jobs in the community from a friend or a family member, and you start looking for the opportunity to apply for those jobs. And so that's really your first experience in understanding where those internal barriers are going to come from as an individual. And it starts right at the application process. How we as individuals who are blind or low vision access that information. So in those days, it was the newspapers. Today, it's the internet. And today, there are just as many barriers, unfortunately, for us sometimes being able to access information on the internet, via the internet. And it's challenging because if you can't access it, even though we use technology, assistive technology tools, if the information is not configured appropriately via computer and our screen readers that we use to access what's on the computers are not able to access that information, then it's just like having a newspaper that you can't read.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned some statistics and some of those thoughts regarding the first kind of obstacles we face when we're being younger and looking for jobs. I grew up sighted, and when I became blind, I was 20 years old, and remember going to some, gatherings and parties, and people usually say, "Okay, what do you do?" "Oh, I work doing this, or I work doing that, or I go to school doing this." And when they came to me, it was painful to say, "Well, I'm not doing anything."
Sure.
And a lot of us maybe manage a way to pretend we are happy, but we have an internal pain. And the beauty is that we shouldn't be stuck doing nothing. Anyhow, that's what I wanted to mention. But it also reminded me when I was running a transition program in New Mexico, talking about awareness, the first part of my job, I needed to send a letter to the public schools to let them know that we are an agency for the blind and that we were recruiting blind students so they can get some training and work during the summer, 7 weeks training and jobs. I also sent a letter to the employers to tell them about the kind of agency we are and if they could give a chance to a blind person to work. The first year, I didn't get that much excitement. And talking about awareness, the second year, well, let me go back. Then I started to call the public schools and say, well, how come you guys didn't send me students? I have this and this and this letter. And they say, well, we don't have any blind person here. What do you mean you don't have any blind person there? I got calls from other students. Oh, no, but he and she, they are not blind. They are low vision.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about awareness,
Yes.
To me, being blind is not necessarily being totally blind. So for those who don't know, when we're talking about being blind people, 90% of those of us who are blind are not totally blind. We have some low vision, we have some residual vision. But again, that wasn't enlightenment for me, then I needed to speak also part of their language. So that was that. Then the employers, I had to change my letter and started to say what blind people are capable of doing, that we don't want to be a burden to them, meaning the agency. We will provide job coaches. They don't have to pay their salaries. We will pay the insurance in case of accidents for workers' comp. So I had to explain everything so they wouldn't have any issues. I said, all we're asking you is to give us a chance and give this blind youth a chance. And I started to get more response.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting how important awareness is.
Well, it's interesting that until you spoke to the school systems and said, you know what, why aren't we receiving, more kids that are blind or low vision? And their definition of blind was completely different, but also that the opportunity was there. And so until you started speaking about that you have all these services that you could provide, you can provide training for these for the youth, especially ones that have not previously had any kind of work experience, because we all grow up wanting to have that. Our peers that are not blind or have another type of a disability, they get that opportunity. But oftentimes kids that are blind or have other disabilities don't necessarily get that kind of an opportunity. So it's interesting that until you started speaking about the services, the specific ways that you could partner with them, and that's what it is. It is a partnership, but it's a mutual beneficial partnership.
Exactly.
To the agency, to the school system, to employers, to the consumers that are being served.
A partnership with mutual respect.
Yes. And expectations. We often think that we might be expecting individuals with disabilities to not achieve or to underachieve or to just sit in isolation. And that's not, the expectation that you necessarily want to give to a person. You want to inspire, you want to promote, you want to help motivate, you want to train, you want to be able to let people know, that there is life beyond blindness, that you can absolutely be in the community, and that employers need to know that this is an untapped resource, and that individuals who are blind or low vision or who have other disabilities can certainly be qualified candidates to work in an employment setting at a wide range of positions.
Yeah, and part of that, it's also you need to be able to advocate. You need to be able to be assertive. I believe around 70% of blind people are either unemployed or underemployed. And Janet, I want you to tell us, one time you told me your story about your first job, when you look for a job Why don't you tell us that story? I think our listener will enjoy.
Well, my very first job I was looking for, I think I must have been somewhere around 14 or 15 years old. And I saw that there was a program that was coming to our community that they were looking for individuals to hire, young people to hire for summer jobs. So at the end of every school year, this program came around, and it had different jobs that they would have available to youth, and you could work all summer and get your first, paycheck as well as work experience. I was really excited about it. I went down to the office where you had to show up in order to apply for the job. And I was very open and upfront because they were going to ask me to fill out an application. I did not have anyone with me that day to fill out an application. And I said, I'm going to need help with filling out the application. Is there someone that can help me? Well, no, why can't you fill out the application? And I said, well, because I am legally blind. I have some vision, but not enough vision to fill out the application. Well, if you can't fill out the application, then you can't have the job. And I don't know what job we would be able to help you with. And I said, well, all I need is you to help me with filling it out. I can handle the rest. It's just that I can't see the paperwork. Well, I'm sorry, but you really are not going to be able to work, with this program. And so I went home extremely disappointed and just frustrated, that was really my first experience with asking for a job and doing what everybody else really does expect us to do in our society, which is you do what you can do, you go to work, and if you need help, you ask for help. Well, the moment I asked for help, I was not, given that help that I actually needed. And so my mother said, well, how did it go? Did you get the job? And I said, no, I didn't. And she said, why not? And I said, well, I told them that I couldn't see well, and I asked them for help to fill out the application. And they said no, that they would not help me, that they were not able to help me, and that I would not be able to do the work. And the work really was quite easy to do. It was cleaning up, parks and areas, and, making sure that flowers were planted in some of the boxes along the downtown area. And mind you, they were training you for this. So it wasn't like you had to know how to do some of these things. You were going to be trained as part of the program. And so my mother said, got her car keys, and she said, let's go, let's get in a car. And I goes, where are we going? And she said, we're going down to that office. And I said, but they already said no, and they're not going to help me. And she said, well, let's just go. We'll see. And so we drove down to that office, and my mother walked in there. I was so embarrassed. You're 15, you're 15 years old. You don't exactly want, to have your parent, come into a job office, looking for a job. And I know my mom, my mom was, just like a lioness, with her cubs.
Yeah.
And so my mom walked in, and she says, my daughter just told me that, she was asking for help to fill out an application. And they said, yes, ma'am. And my mother said, well, why aren't you able to help her? She needs help filling out the application. That doesn't mean she can't work, but she does need help filling out the application. And they said, well, we don't do that. Everybody fills out their application themselves. And my mother said, but I just told you that she cannot fill out her application. So let me speak to a supervisor, someone in this office that will understand, what the situation is. Well, long story short, they assigned me somebody. I finally got the application completed, got the job. But I can honestly tell you that I don't think I would have gotten that job had my mother not advocated, on my behalf. But I think that's also where I got my first lesson in advocacy.
That's what I mean. You learn to advocate later for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think also, I don't want to paint a picture that employers just don't want to hire people who are blind. I think that there's multiple issues that take place. I think that it's the lack of awareness, like you said.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's the lack of experience of being with people who might have a visual impairment.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I'm the director of the Nebraska Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And our job is to train blind people, support them both with blindness skills, but also technical or professional careers. And many times the employers want to help, but they don't know how. So it's our job to work with them, to educate them, to support them. So these days we are thinking about serving blind people, but also serving the employers. Because most of them, they want to help, they just don't know how.
Sure.
And it's our responsibility, those in the vocational rehabilitation profession, but also blind people themselves to advocate, but to teach them, not to go aggressively, but with assertiveness.
Yes.
And once we get a job, let's do our best to be productive, because we are productive. What I used to tell employers when I did job placement was, listen, everybody you hire work out just perfect? Oh, no way. Okay, so if you hire a blind person, it might not work, but that doesn't mean every blind person is that way. Blind people and low vision folks are like any other person. Some of them will work out in your place, some might not. They might do better in other places. So let's just give us an opportunity. If it works, great, we continue the partnership. If it doesn't, don't just make a general assumption that blind people cannot compete. Don't worry about letting the person go. No hard feelings. We will continue liking each other. And that's how we build trusting partnerships.
Yes, and I can't tell you so many times in my own career path, and I'm sure in yours as well, it's those partnerships that have changed the paradigm. And that oftentimes, depending on what our labor market is doing, it's still very challenging for people with disabilities. And the American Foundation for the Blind did a barriers to digital inclusion survey. And 90% of the people that they surveyed, and these were all individuals who are blind or low vision, 90% of them reported that the barrier for them was the access to any type of digital information. So that's anything from, for example, websites not being accessible, or you have the iPhones now, where you can use your own iPhone to access information, thank goodness, but that wasn't always the case either. But there are apps that are not accessible either, for people who need that access. And so those kind of barriers, because they still exist, it's inherent that what will happen is that you may not necessarily be getting the best candidate for the job, or that you may be, excluding people, obviously, maybe unintentionally, but, for example, the ADA, certainly not being accessible today has its repercussions also. And so because of the ADA, which was signed into law on July 26, 1990, companies, websites, apps, must all be accessible. And technology is changing so quickly that it makes it hard also to keep up with that. But there are so many potential solutions that can be utilized in order to reduce some of those barriers.
Yeah, as we talk about technology and you mentioned barriers, I remember traveling around a lot. Well, I still do, but I was deputy director back then, maybe 20 years ago. And because being frequent flyer, I sometimes had the opportunity to go on first class. And I want our blind and low vision friends and also disabled otherwise to understand that we are educating the public whenever we go out.
Yes.
Not only when we are going to a job interview, not only when we are in the workplace, but all the time. Like it or not, we are not the norm. People look at us and they are observing you. So anyhow, I was at the airport. I think it was in Washington, D.C. I was coming back from, no, never mind. I think I was in Chicago, but coming from Washington, I changed planes in Chicago. And in the Chicago airport, I look for my food. I kind of follow the noise, found the food court, asked where was a burger place. So I got a hamburger, went back to my gate, kind of asking around, found a seat. And as I was eating, I keep listening around and noticed that people were throwing the garbage to a certain direction, kind of 20 feet in a diagonal way to my left. And the noise was peculiar. You could hear how they opened the can. It was a plastic container. Well, a big one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I finished eating, drink my soda, got everything back in the paper bag and stood, got up, looked for the trash can, throw everything away, went back, waited to be boarded. I boarded first class and I was ready to sleep because I was tired. Well, the gentleman next to me wanted to talk.
Ugh.
And you know how that goes. Oh, you're blind.
Oh, yeah.
But he started to say, well, I saw you just walking by yourself, doing everything by yourself. That was very good, he said. Oh, yeah, thank you. So what do you do? So I told him I was deputy director of the Nebraska Commission for the Blind. And what is that about? So I told him about finding jobs for blind people. We train this and that. And I said, how about you? He was the director of the Department of Corrections.
Oh, my goodness.
And as part of that, they did pro and cons, meaning the inmates did brailing for blind people, books and so forth. So he gave me his card, and of course, I wanted to build a relationship. So we purchased braille stuff, maps, and so forth. But then we have a client who had a master's in counseling, drug, alcohol counseling, a master's degree. And he applied 3 times to the Department of Corrections, and he never got an interview, even an interview. I think the last time he got an interview, but he wasn't offered a job. And when we look at the job positions, they were still opening the same ones and sometimes giving jobs to those who have counseling degrees, but not master's degree. So I called the director, my new friend, right? And I said, hey, Harold, let's call this client Mike. I know this guy, Mike. He has a master's in drug and alcohol counseling. He's applying to the Department of Corrections and he's not even getting an interview. I don't want you to intersect or trying to give him a job just because he's blind. I want him to have a chance. No, he has a master's degree and I just want you to give him a chance. Let me handle this. So then he called me 30 minutes later and said, Carlos, I instructed them to interview this guy because it's a shame that he's not being interviewed having a master's degree. We need counselors. He said.
Yes.
To make the long story short, this guy, Mike, was hired, did a wonderful job, was happy, stayed there for a long time. And this Harold Clark, the director, will come to the different job fairs and activities we did to talk to employers telling them the capability of the blind and his experience with Mike. So I just wanted to tell that story, how important it is that we, when we are going out there in public, we are constantly educating the public.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're going to do also for our next program, so we hope people will tune in and listen, because we are also going to talk not only about what some of these issues are. We talked about technology barriers. We talked about, certainly the application process and some of the attitude barriers and myths about blindness and the ability of blind people to actually work. We talked about the benefits. We're also going to cover some of the resources like training programs and different types of resources and ways that individuals, if you're a family member or if you're a professional or if you're a person who is blind or low vision and you're looking for employment, we want to be able to share this information with you. So please stay tuned to our next program. And don't forget to like and subscribe as well so that you can gain this access to information. And we look forward to connecting with you again on our next program.
That's right. See you next time. Thanks, Janet.
You're very welcome. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. You too.